Good evening, welcome to Scotland at 7. It's the 26th of February and I'm Gordon Ross. Joining me on this evening's programme I have two guests, special guests in fact. Owen Thompson, MP for Midlothian. Welcome to you, Owen. How are you tonight?
Hi Gordon, very well thanks.
Nice to see you. Okay, and also joining us this evening, Alan Thompson, who is the Government Affairs Officer for Skyrora, a rocket company based in Edinburgh. Welcome to the programme, Alan.
Good evening. Thank you, Gordon. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, it's very nice to have you here. We'll come back to both of you shortly. First of all, the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,677,608 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these, 1,476,621 were confirmed negative, 200,987 have tested positive. There are 581 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. This, of course, is an underestimate of the number of cases because not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 27 new reported deaths today of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infections now stands at 7,111. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 924 were in hospital last night, 80 of whom were in intensive care. Now, as of 8 o'clock this morning, 1,542,929 people have now received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination and 65,340 had received their second dose. In a milestone today, the 14-day average of new cases in Scotland at 784 reached its lowest number since the 9th of October last year. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 122,415 patients who had tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 345 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation tonight here, you can do so. I beg your pardon, we're not doing the Twitter feed tonight, I beg your pardon. So tonight's main headlines. Phase 2 of the vaccination rollout, and Health Secretary Jeane Freeman has welcomed the interim advice set out by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI, on the next stage of the coronavirus COVID-19 vaccination programme. Ms Freeman said, "We welcome the interim advice of the Independent Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation for Phase 2 of the vaccination deployment programme to continue prioritising people for vaccinations by age, as this is assessed to be the best way to address the risk of severe illness and mortality." The Labour Party is to support Trident nuclear weapon replacement. Labour's commitment to maintaining the UK's nuclear weapons is non-negotiable, the party's Shadow Defence Minister John Healey said in a speech today, emphasising a deliberate shift in tone from the Jeremy Corbyn era. The SNP have laid down a challenge to the next Scottish Labour leader to stand up to Starmer and to prove they are more than Scotland's representative in Scotland. Scottish Labour's leadership hopefuls Anas Sarwar and Monica Lennon have been challenged to prove that they will be more than just a branch office manager and rubber-stamping UK support for nuclear weapons. In Scotland, polls have consistently shown a majority in favour of scrapping nuclear weapons. And of course, Alex Salmond was at the Holyrood Committee today, following a turbulent week in Holyrood. Alex Salmond finally appeared before the committee of the Scottish Government handling of harassment complaints to give evidence. Mr Salmond responded robustly to questioning by committee members in relation to his written evidence submission. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is expected to appear before the committee next Wednesday. Now, specialist support for health and social care staff and health and social care professionals will have access to new specialist services offering confidential mental health assessment and treatment. The Workforce Specialist Service will be delivered by experts with experience in treating a range of issues such as stress, anxiety, depression or addiction, with a focus on the impact this may have on a person's work. A multidisciplinary team will support anyone who belongs to one of the regulated professions within health and social care. It's the latest part of a package of resources available to the workforce, including a National Wellbeing Hub, the National Wellbeing Helpline and specific psychological services provided by health boards at local level. And now a Scottish Victimisation Telephone Survey 2020. The Scottish Victimisation Telephone Survey, based on a sample of around 2,700 telephone interviews conducted in September and October of 2020, has found that there were an estimated 445,000 incidents of crime experienced by adults in Scotland between September 2019 and September 2020, including incidents not reported to the police. Most adults, 91%, were not victims of any crime between September 2019 and 2020, with around 1 in 11, or 9% of adults in Scotland experiencing crime over this time period. It's estimated that 8% of adults were victims of property crime and 2% experienced a violent crime. The likelihood of experiencing a crime was higher with those living in urban areas rather than those aged 60 and over, at least likely to be victims. Around 3% of the adult population of Scotland experienced multiple victimisation, whereby they experienced 2 or more incidents of any crime. This group experienced 61% of all crime recorded by the SVTS. An estimated 41% of crimes reported in the survey came to the attention of the police in some way. Now, the Tories must use the budget to tackle debt and inequalities. The SNP has urged the UK government to use the upcoming budget to tackle the growing UK debt crisis and inequalities gap. According to the Financial Conduct Authority, the economic impact of COVID-19 has split the UK in two. While millions of people struggle to get by, with younger people and black and ethnic minority adults disproportionately affected by the crisis, 48% of adults said it has not affected them financially. 1 in 7, or 14%, have actually seen an improvement in their finances in the past year. 14.2 million UK adults have low financial resilience, meaning that they are over-indebted or have low levels of savings, an increase of 3.5 million since the beginning of the pandemic. And now to Shamima Begum, who has lost her fight to restore her UK citizenship. Shamima Begum, who fled England as a schoolgirl to join Islamic State in Syria, has failed in her bid to have her UK citizenship restored after the Supreme Court ruled against her case. Today's judgment is critical and controversial test case of the UK's policy to strip the citizenship from citizens who went to join ISIS and who are being detained by Syrian Kurdish groups without trial. Lord Reid, the president of the court, said its judges had decided unanimously to rule in favour of the Home Secretary and against Begum on all counts before it. That means the 21-year-old will not be able to re-enter the UK to fight her case in person and will not be able to have her citizenship restored while she is still being detained in Syria. And now to the subject of teacher training. The STEM bursary scheme to encourage more people to train as secondary school teachers in physics, chemistry, mathematics, computing science, technical education and home economics is set to continue. These are secondary school STEM subjects with the greatest demand for teachers, and 150 bursaries will once again be available for career changers to apply for the £20,000 bursary in the next academic year, while studying for a postgraduate diploma in education. Skills Development Scotland will open a bursary scheme for applications on the 5th of April 2021. Now, bidders are being sought for a £115 million Highland A9 dualling section. The next phase of the A9 dualling programme will see around 6 miles of the route between Tomatin and Moy upgraded to dual carriageway. Situated approximately 13 miles south of Inverness, this is the most northerly section of the Scottish Government's £3 billion programme to dual the A9 between Perth and Inverness. Transport Scotland have today published the made orders for the scheme, which when complete will result in nearly 20 miles of continuous dual carriageway south of the city of Inverness. Today also signals the start of procurement for the £115 construction contract for this section of the route, providing welcome news for the Scottish construction industry. The project involves upgrading approximately 6 miles or 9.6 kilometres of existing single carriageway to an all-purpose dual carriageway, extending from the south of Tomatin to the north of Moy. Right, that is the end of the news section of this programme, and I'd like to reintroduce my guest to you this evening. First of all, Owen Thompson, MP for Midlothian. Welcome to the programme again.
Hi, Gordon. Good to see you.
Okay, and also to Alan Thompson from Skyrora, a rocket company based in Edinburgh. So welcome to you as well, Alan.
Thanks, Gordon. Pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. It's always nice to have new guests on the programme. Tonight is a subject for a discussion tonight is something very close to my heart, and I know that you two both have vested interest in this, and that is, of course, the Scottish space industry. And let me start by asking you a fairly general question. If I could start, first of all, with you, Owen, as a resident politician here this evening. Space industry important?
Else outside California, and I got involved because Skyrora have the workshop set up in Midlothian, and visited and was absolutely blown away by the ambition of the company and the opportunity that the space industry could bring to my constituency in Midlothian and many others across the country.
We hear quite a lot about Scotland punching above its weight, to use the popular phrase. I understand that as a sort of percentage of the population of the UK, Scotland's space industry employs around about 20% of all space professionals in the United Kingdom. Why do you think Scotland has become such a magnet for space science and engineers?
It's obviously, apart from being a fantastic location to work from, I think the cluster of companies that have grown up in the West producing the satellites, and companies like Skyrora, and there's Orbex and Forest who are working in launch, and we've got the platforms for launch sites in Scotland as well. There's so many different aspects of the industry that are kind of working together, and I mean, there's more than 40,000 people across the industry now employed here, and there really are so many opportunities for other companies to join in the supply chain, and just the expertise and sort of careers for the future, if you like, for our young people to have an ambition to do something that certainly, you would always have historically assumed that this is something you would have to travel over to the States or somewhere like that if you wanted to be involved in space, but actually it's right on our doorstep.
It certainly is. Owen, if I could bring you in at this stage, we've talked a little bit about the space industry in general, and many people will be aware, at least, that Scotland manufactures quite a lot of satellites, but they might be surprised at just how many it seems to manufacture. I think the list I last saw was something like over 400 satellites, and I think that was per year. It was a lot. But do you feel that the satellite industry has somewhat overshadowed the launcher industry in Scotland, and in fact in the UK generally?
I mean, certainly the satellite element of it is so much.
Alan, I beg your pardon. I'm not sure if I said Owen or Alan. I meant to say Alan there. Sorry, Alan, beg your pardon. I'm going it's going to be fun tonight.
I know Owen probably got a better response than mine, but anyway. No. I think the satellite industry was given the opportunity to develop in general by the UK, and indeed that's now been around for at least 25 years. We've got some really great companies, as mentioned already, in Glasgow, including Clyde Space, Orbital, and Spire, who are very much inspiring, I think, the next generation of satellites. And indeed, they're the main workhorse, if you could say, for the number of satellites being manufactured and launched today from Scotland. Sorry, not being launched from Scotland, but being launched by Scotland in the world. I think the opportunity right now is actually to begin to understand what it means to launch those from Scotland and from the spaceports in Scotland and capture that value. And that, I think, is really the excuse and the opportunity we've got. We, as a launch industry manufacturer, launch vehicle manufacturer, obviously very closely aligned to these satellite manufacturers because they're our market, they're our biggest clients. And yes, we have a good collaboration around trying to help them get their input into what the rules need to be to allow us to launch. And as I should just point out again today, the spaceflight regulations are still work in progress. They haven't been finalized. And that's the biggest, I suppose, existential challenge on the plate of the launch industry in Scotland today. So we're all working towards achieving a launch that will help us all get into the commercial market.
Okay, Alan, thank you very much. Your picture appears to have frozen a little bit, so I've got to come back to you in a moment. Owen, perhaps it might be worth discussing what launching from Scotland means, because a lot of people don't equate launching rockets, with launching from Scotland, which is very far up into the northern hemisphere, Owen, isn't it? Why would companies want to launch satellites from Scotland rather than, say, the equator, where it's traditional to do it?
Yeah, I think obviously so many images.
We want to get Alan.
So many.
Sorry, we want to get Owen on. Sorry, Owen.
Oh no, sorry. So many images of space launch are what we see from Cape Canaveral, the huge vehicles taking astronauts up into space. I think when you talk about space launch, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind for most people. The vehicles that are required to take the satellites into orbit are much smaller, and it's quite a different undertaking altogether. And actually, being placed where we are and so far north actually gives us many advantages, because launch trajectories, if you consider that to launch, this is something that's going miles into the air, it has to be above something. So actually going up from Scotland minimises where you're passing over effectively on the way up. So it reduces some of the risk in that, and actually you're able to get into a different orbit than you would if you were simply going up from the equator. So there's big advantages for companies who want to put their satellites up into a less cluttered environment, if you like.
Okay, thanks very much. Alan, I'd like to come back to you. I know the picture is a little bit frozen, but hopefully you can still... Okay, I think we'll come back to Alan in a moment. Owen, I'm sorry, you're going to have to take up the slack while we get a new connection. I'm sorry, I've just been informed Alan's there. Can you hear me? Alan, I'm sorry. What I'd like to ask you is why polar orbiting satellites are important. Where is the market coming from? Is this from Earth sensing? Is it to do with climate change? What's the actual need for polar launching? Is Alan hearing me? Okay, I apologise. We shall come back to Owen. Owen, I'm sorry, I know this is a bit of a technical question. Okay. Are we still live? Okay. Okay, I've just been told that we're experiencing a computer problem. We're going to disconnect and reconnect with our guest just shortly. Let me fill in some of the gaps for you. Polar orbits are orbits, they're basically what they sound like. A rocket is fired over the North Pole. It orbits over the North Pole and under the South Pole. And normally, such orbits are used. Get me in. We have Alan. We have Owen. Okay. Okay, sorry about the delays in the transmission this evening. A problem with our computer, but we're back up and running. And I just wanted to finally get around to talking to Alan Thompson from Skyrora about this question of polar orbiting satellites. Alan, what the market is for satellites like this and why Scotland is such a great place to launch from.
Yeah, indeed, the opportunity that we, Skyrora, have identified is to put these satellites into low Earth orbit, and the low Earth orbit is the best orbit for Earth observation data. So the satellites that we will be looking to launch from the north of Scotland are the polar orbit, rather than the standard orbit that everyone thinks about when you think about space flight, which is an orbit from the equator. We think that actually launching from the north of Scotland and firing towards the North Pole and over the North Pole, and then doing an orbit around from the pole to pole, actually this gives a better coverage for satellites of the land, and the capture a better coverage for capturing observation data about what's happening on the Earth itself, on the surface, and actually can help inform, I suppose, capture the data about what the environmental effects are, what where the snow's fallen, where how do you stop prevent floods the type of weather conditions, that this is the kind of capabilities that the satellites that we're launching will be sort of championing. And we think that so the general statement is that any northernly placed or southerly placed closer to the polar ice caps is better to start that orbit and to do a polar orbit in that way. And as we said, it sort of gives a better coverage of the land surface, and interactive. Obviously, it goes around from pole to pole, capturing more data as it goes. So, and we think that's what we're looking to capture. Sorry.
I was just going to ask you, Alan, you were talking about capturing a market. How big is the current market for these small size satellites at the moment in the United Kingdom?
So we estimate that by 2030, we will be delivering at least 3,500. And that's based on an estimation of around about 16 launches a year. Our launch vehicle is designed to deliver 315 kilograms of payload. And if we take an average sort of, I suppose, well, as an example, a OneWeb satellite today weighs about 150 kilograms of payload. So we can possibly take 2 of those. Now, I know that OneWeb is in an active launch phase at the moment, and they're launching actively, I think it's 16 vehicles a month. But the kind of satellites that we're looking to be more of the taxi service for, if I can say that, they're the Earth observation satellites, and they're actually going to be smaller than 150 kilograms. So we're looking at an average weight of around about 20 to 30 kilograms per satellite. Of course, there are even smaller ones as well. So as I said, we're estimating around about 3,500 satellites by the year 2030. And that's based on 12 launches a year. Sorry.
That seems a remarkable value for money, Alan. And of course, you'd be doing what I think is commonly known as ride sharing, where you launch multiple satellites from the same launcher. Is that correct?
The idea, as I said, Skyrora is trying to champion the concept of this taxi service. So what we have today is SpaceX and the large, you could say, legacy space rockets that are launched from the US and from Russia and from other places at the moment. Those are the rideshare vehicles. We're actually so SpaceX is comparable to a bus. They take a large number of satellites to a low Earth orbit of about 500 kilometers. That is the bus stop, and at 500 kilometers, they get ejected. As you may see from the market today, there are already companies developing solutions to help the people who get ejected at the bus stop get a specific front door. But those are like the last mile solutions for those satellites that are being developed to complement the Elon Musk and SpaceX solutions that are on today. Skyrora, on the other hand, actually to be the integral taxi service from launch. So we have the third stage of our vehicle is designed to go and insert those satellites into a specific orbit. So take them to their specific front door, if you will, and deliver the satellites that we have on board into their specific orbit. As I said, we can actually differentiate the third stage vehicle, which is the deployment vehicle we're using to put those satellites into orbit, can vary the orbit, so we can actually go to 454 kilometers for one satellite, and then take the next one again to 570, for example. So yeah, the capability that we're looking to capture is precisely the last mile and being able to differentiate for the actual satellites themselves.
Because I was honoured to be a witness to the test firing of that particular rocket stage, which takes these payloads into orbit a couple of years ago, Alan. Anyway, I'd like to try and get back to Owen. I'm sorry about our loss of contact, Owen, earlier on. I'd like to take this conversation now towards the subject of regulation and authority. And my understanding at the moment is that the UK government has recently concluded its regulation of the space industry. But can you tell me, has this had any effect on the launch industry in the UK so far? And is it likely to?
It'll certainly have an impact. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is the time it's taking for regulations to come through the UK government. We had the debate at the start of February, start of this month, on this, and we had a great buy-in from members from all across the UK who have an interest in this field, companies around, and there was a general consensus really across all parties, all politicians, that there's a real need for the UK government to really speed up the process at which they roll out the regulations, because there's a danger that if they go at the snail's pace as they've been going at so far, that companies that are looking to do more, to launch more, to move faster, will simply find an alternative location to do it from.
One other thing, Owen, that struck me about this the situation with UK regulation was that, as far as I understand it, pardon me, the UK government also set up, as well as the UK Space Agency, another body called the National Space Council. And my question really is why, when the UK Space Agency already exists to govern the sector, and why has the Space Agency so far failed to produce any launches from the UK?
I think there's a number of questions around the approach that's been taken. I know the industry have been very vocal in suggesting what could be done and how the regulations could be put in place and how we could actually accelerate this programme. So far, the government have kind of said, yes, this is very important. I'm slightly concerned that there are a number of sound bites used. So when we have strategic reviews announced and the Prime Minister can announce grand plans for space, the headlines sound brilliant, but unfortunately the detail and the work required in that isn't quite there. And then you've got the other element of that, which is the sort of technology safeguards agreement that they signed with the US, which to some, they were very secretive about the detail of that, having signed it. They didn't actually publish the detail of it till a number of months later. And I'm certainly concerned, and I know others are, that perhaps prioritises US launches from this country rather than our own homegrown industry.
Yeah, thank you. Alan, let me put this same subject to you, not just the subject of regulation, but as Owen has just mentioned, the UK government has signed an agreement with the United States, this so-called Technology Safeguards Agreement, which sounds a very asinine name for something which is really about space launching. Is it, do you think, going to prevent Indigenous Scottish space launch companies from operating, and is it a threat to a nascent space industry in Scotland?
That's a very good question. I think part of the problem that we have is that we don't really understand the nature of that agreement and the treaty and what it means in commercial terms. So there are a number of these agreements, these treaties that exist, and they exist to protect the intellectual property of the US tech and solutions that they are going to basically share in this way. These agreements mostly feature within the Ministry of Defense. So, for example, when a piece of US tech, an F-35 jet fighter, for example, lands in the UK, there is a similar treaty which stipulates how and whom has access to that US tech. So it's basically set up to try and, as it says on the tin, to safeguard their technology.
So I'm sorry, Alan, just to clarify, so this technology, what do they call it? The Technology Safeguards Agreement is to basically protect proprietary or secret military equipment?
You could, I'm not so yes, definitely. I think the military aspect is there, but in this instance, they're trying to apply this treaty to the commercial market. And yes, the idea is that it is to protect the US technology that they want to use to launch in Scotland. The challenge that we've got...
Sorry, Alan, what were you going to say?
I said the challenge that we've got is exactly how this is going to be manifested in the commercial market. And as Owen already pointed out, there's not a broad awareness of what this means and how it works. So we've actually, as an industry, we've taken the initiative to try and talk through what this could mean. In certain aspects, it could just mean there's a segregation with a red line on the concrete saying that anything after this is technically within the scope of this Technology Safeguards Agreement, and only people with US government clearance are allowed to go into that red line area where one would expect the equipment or the space rocket in this instance would be being stored and prepared for launch. So there's like it's like an additional measure on top of safety and health and safety limitations around the spaceport itself, that wherever there is going to be an American space rocket or American technologies, that there will be an additional kind of like border, you could say, in place to enable that to happen. So yes, it's a measure that sort of fits in with the American export controls measures that I think a lot of people may have heard. They're called ITAR. They're very complicated and they're very stringent in how they try to protect this intellectual property of the US. And yes, in particular in the area of space, this is a very strong area of attention of the US government whenever this happens. So in the bigger scheme of things, what does this mean? We do see as a threat, we do see that potentially the Technology Safeguards Agreement was deliberately set up as a way to allow the US to launch, which, don't get me wrong, we're not against. What we're against is the fact that this was a concession given to the US over or in advance of any development of the space industry or the launch industry at home in the UK before we'd even got to any kind of level. So what seems a bit strange is that, first of all, as Owen said, it's a little bit clandestine, a little bit not public. And the space industry, apart from dealing with the challenges faced about trying to get the regulations in place, which, let's say, are standard, we're also concerned about this extra measure, which basically you could say is an override on the UK launch regulations today, allowing the US to basically override that and do launch instead of and favoring their companies rather than, as Owen said, sort of helping UK companies to develop the way they should be.
Alan, that's a very fulsome reply. One of the additional pieces of information I understand has just come forth recently is the fact that Lockheed Martin, American company who was mentioned in this agreement, have since decided to launch their rockets apparently from Shetland rather than the UK's proposed site in the Moyne Peninsula in Sutherland. Can you verify that? Is that true? Have Lockheed decided to launch from elsewhere?
So as far as we know, yes, the Lockheed investment into launch for the UK, I think, is commonly defined as this Pathfinder program. So they have a program whereby Lockheed will be launching a vehicle on the back of a launch vehicle from the north of Scotland, and this is what they signed up to when the government announced their launch plans, focused, as you mentioned at that time, on Sutherland. So what happened, as far as we're aware, is that Lockheed Martin transferred that program and the realization of that program from Sutherland to Shetland, and I think it happened in the course of last year. What the reasons are for it and the justification, again, I'm not entirely sure. We have had a certain collaboration both with all the spaceport projects that are current at the moment, but we haven't actually specifically worked out what the reasons are. So I think we will leave that as open as possible.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alan. Owen, if I could come back to you for my next question, and this is more of a political question, I guess. Alok Sharma recently left the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and that seems to have left the UK without anyone to really drive the UK space industry. Who is actually now responsible? Which minister is actually now responsible for the space industry in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I suppose to an extent it depends what angle we come from, because the regulations are, certainly as far as I'm aware, still sitting with effectively the Civil Aviation Authority, so Department of Transport. There are undoubtedly elements of defence interest in here, but there's also the huge environmental aspect to the space industry and the opportunities that can be brought from it. So I think this is one of the issues that it does lead to the sort of lack of clarity and lack of direction of the UK government. They don't really seem to have worked out themselves exactly what the focus needs to be. That there are ministers who will sometimes try to answer your questions, or certainly hold a sort of surgery for members who want to ask questions if you're lucky enough to get a slot to ask it. But that does change, and it's sort of the focus, I think, needs to be brought really much tighter so that there is somebody, a named individual, driving the agenda across all of these departments to make sure that we're taking account of the needs of industry at the same time as understanding the regulations and how it impacts on wider society, but also the opportunities that are there for us to grow it and to grow the jobs that could come from it.
Okay, if I could go back to you, Alan, for my next question. We're talking there, Owen raised the question of sustainability in the space industry in Scotland. Now, on the pressing matter of climate change and the crisis that is going to pose in the future after the COVID crisis is finished, how important is space access now for Scottish efforts to monitor and to model the changing climate and sea levels, particularly the northern ice caps? How vital is that now?
To be honest with you, I think the best way to answer that question is to understand and evaluate the skill set that we have within the Environmental Agency today, so that's SEPA, and what they're doing with space data. So as far as I'm aware, yes, they have highly skilled individuals. And I'd just like to emphasize this. The UK and indeed SEPA are world-leading agencies using space data to come up with best or better environmental management solutions. So as you mentioned, the ice caps, I think I may have mentioned a wee bit earlier on, flood defenses, coastline erosions, obviously forestry, I suppose that we're getting also to a level with Scottish companies such as Ecometrica, who are doing a great job at capturing the emissions or monitoring air quality and things like this. So from my point of view, as you mentioned and as you suggested, the sustainability angle, in fact, I want to take a step back and say that space is the environment. Why is, if we equate space to being the environment, then it makes sense that if we're wanting to go to space, we need to be very careful and responsible about how we do it. Yeah. We're hearing an awful lot at the moment about space debris and the potential or risk of a collision of satellites on orbit because there's so many up there already. Well, I'm not sure there's that many, but yes, there is a growing risk of collision of space debris and satellites. I think one of the Starlink satellites that belongs to Elon Musk came very close to one of the European Space Agency satellites not that long ago. So there is an increase of risk there. The point that we're trying to make with regards to space being the environment and responsibility is that we as a launch vehicle manufacturer actually want to demonstrate that we have that responsibility and that we're asking, I suppose, authorization from the population that the reason why we're going into space is to improve our environmental management systems, is to get better data, is to find better solutions about how we can further improve the environment in which we live in by extending it to space, by extending the responsibility around, again, tidying up the environment already that's there in space. And by using it effectively, we believe that we can actually demonstrate this level of responsibility and therefore, I suppose, earn or deserve the right to explore space further.
Can I ask you a question following on from what you were just saying about the role of Skyrora and other small launcher manufacturers in providing access, cheap access to low Earth orbit? Many people will have seen rocket launches in the past and they see clouds of smoke billowing out, exhaust flames. They're worried about the atmosphere. They're worried about carbon. Has Skyrora, I know as you represent Skyrora yourself, has Skyrora made efforts to do anything with its rockets to make sure that they're more, not carbon neutral or less polluting? How do we get around that problem?
So yes, it's a very good question. I think we in Skyrora are very much aspiring to and supporting the net zero aims that the Scottish Government's declared. And indeed, from that point of view, we are championing some of the solutions, our own solutions to help achieve that. So yes, I should start by saying that the technology that Skyrora has adapted and taken is not our own technology. Actually, it's a UK technology using a biliquid fuel solution, so a propellant solution based on an oxidizer, which is hydrogen peroxide, and a kerosene-based fuel. Now, this bipropellant solution, when we take hydrogen peroxide and pressurize it up to 300 bar. We force it through a catalytic converter with silver, which strips it of everything else and leaves the oxygen in the combustion chamber at 600 degrees Celsius, which then naturally combusts with kerosene in this combustion chamber. In order to achieve that, so first of all, we don't need an igniter plug to ignite that fluid. That naturally takes place when you achieve the right pressure of the hydrogen peroxide coming through the catalytic converter. And second point, in order to achieve that, we're using 6 parts of oxidizer to 1 part of kerosene. So rather than, I think it's a 2-to-1 ratio if you're using liquid oxygen as the oxidizer and 1 part of kerosene. And that's the traditional bi-liquid propellant solution that is being used on SpaceX today. What does that mean? That means basically that there are less parts of kerosene, which is obviously the carbon footprint element. There's less parts of carbon being burnt in our combustion engine, and therefore we claim that even on the basis that we're still using a carbon-based fuel, which is kerosene, that actually we have already reducing the amount of emissions by up to 45% in comparison to a traditional launch. Now, the other aspect is the kerosene fuel itself, and we, Skyrora, developed a solution taking unrecyclable plastic, so taking the farmer's wrap, taking waste plastic from the ocean, taking waste plastic from dumps, and particularly the styrenes that are particular, so it's the fish and chip trays that you have, taking that and turning that back into this EcoScene fuel. So we've developed a proprietary fuel that we called EcoScene. As I said, it's an ecological fuel in as far as we're extracting waste plastic from our environment. Yes, the process itself does involve pyrolysis, and yes, we are capturing the carbon from that pyrolysis. So burning the plastics, we are capturing the carbon in terms of the emissions of that process. And yes, then we achieve this fuel stuff, which is EcoScene, which is an equivalent or very close equivalent to RP1, the rocket propellant 1 kerosene grade fuel that is being used in the US today. So we think we've got a good starter for 10, at least in terms of emissions and power and thrust using this bi-liquid propellant. Again, just to correct the vision, yes, what you see today in SpaceX is actually the clouds of steam that you think you see coming off is actually steam. It's from the liquid oxygen boiling, because the liquid oxygen is obviously kept at liquid state to be useful as an oxidizer for the kerosene. What you're seeing when they start launch with SpaceX today, the clouds that you see before they get to launch or when they're defueling, that's just steam. But yes, indeed, when it does take off, there is a certain amount of carbon burning there. If you do a direct comparison to with a rocket such as the Black Arrow or one of Skyrora's rockets, when we start launching with hydrogen peroxide, the burn has much less carbon emissions. That means there's much less cloud or smoke, and it looks like a clean burn. So it looks like a Bunsen burn when you're looking at it.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like Skyrora have got remarkable achievements already under the belt, manufacturing their own fuel from waste and reducing their carbon emissions by using a room temperature oxidizer. Very good stuff on the technical side. I'd like to take a more political tack now with you, Owen, since you are the politician in the room this evening. The Scottish Government has recently formed the Scottish Space Leadership Council to bring together leading figures to make sure that their views are sought before policy decisions about space are taken. And, you know, has that body met the challenges that it needs to? And if it has already met and had meetings, who was involved and what progress do you know has been made so far?
Well, I think any mechanism that actually engages with the experts and listens to the industry and what's required to make it work, it has to be a good starting point. And actually having that focus, it goes back to my previous points, like having that focus and engaging industry actually gives direction. It's not, I mean, I'm unaware of, and I might be wrong in this, but I'm unaware of many, if any, politicians in the UK with an expertise in space launch. Now, if we rely on people without the expertise to come up with the framework around how space launch will work, I don't think we would be very successful. And I'm maybe being unfair to others, but I don't think we'd be successful, which is why we need something like the Space Council to be able to actually engage with those who actually do know what's required, what is needed, and what will work, to make sure that when we do actually move forward and we get the regulations in place, that when this industry does grow even further, that it's growing in a way that supports the industry and it actually is such a huge success.
Okay, well, thank you for that one. Stay with us for a moment. I'm just going to speak to Alan Thompson for a moment about the next subject. Now, the UK government had bungled an attempt, I think it's fair to say, to develop its own GPS satellite after pulling out of the European Galileo programme, in which I think the UK had a £1.2 billion stake. And the United Kingdom decided to invest in rescuing a bankrupt company called OneWeb. Now, to take this in a more political direction for a moment, Alan, if Scotland has a referendum and if Scotland becomes independent, say, in the future, how confident are you, do you think, that the Scottish Government is going to fulfil its promises and fully support and promote an Indigenous Scottish launch programme and create the thousands of jobs that could produce?
Good question. I think the opportunity, we're sort of over the hump of the hill here. I think we're already sniffing and getting closer to being able to launch, and desperately keen to demonstrate that capability. I think the angle of the angle of independence obviously represents potentially a political challenge. But I think that it's a very realistic scenario that we're facing of launch at the moment, and I think that it would be very, I think easy to continue. I think we've got enough momentum, as Owen mentioned, within the Scottish Space Leadership Council. We've managed to get ourselves collaborated across the industry. We've identified partners, not just clients, but partners across the industry, the constituent parts of the industry, and we have it all here in Scotland. So we have satellite companies, as we mentioned already, who are more than capable and able to be able to come up with replacement satellites for the GNSS or the GPS positioning type that we're talking about. We have the ability to come up with these solutions and actually to make them work. So in terms of a functionality point of view, I think it would be short-sighted of the Scottish Government, if we became independent, that they pulled the plug on this project. I think there's still, we've got the momentum going. We've got some really useful support from colleagues such as Owen and indeed other members of the SNP in the Scottish Government. And I'd just like to point out here Minister Ivan McKee, who's doing an absolutely really great job of supporting industry and encouraging the Scottish space sector to develop. He's very much up to speed with us and very much attuned and aligned to our needs. And that's very much reflected, as I know that Owen knows as well, back down into Westminster. So we've got a really strong sector. We feel that we're in a really good position, and I think that we're getting close to, it's an inevitability.
Inevitability. I like the sound of that. Owen, would you concur? Is it inevitable that Scotland will one day have its own space programme or its own space agency, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Scottish Government have been very clear that this is an industry for the future that's very key to the country. And we are so well placed when you look at the comparisons internationally. As I say, more satellites being produced than anywhere outside California, and we've got the foresight to have the launch capability ready. The companies who are driving that agenda. We've got the sites to launch from. Everything you could want for the industry is here, and we've got a government that's talking to that industry to make sure that the programs and the culture around it that we have in place actually works for the industry, and we are able to be successful. So I think all of the building blocks are there for this to become a real success story.
Excellent. It sounds like wonderful news. Just before we wind the programme up tonight, gentlemen, I know that we've talked quite a lot about the intricacies of launching rockets in Scotland. Just on a slightly lighter subject, how does the weather play with this? Because one of the key problems with launching anything anywhere in Scotland is the weather. Is there a particular launch site that you would favour, Alan, or that Skyrona would look to as being a possible site?
I think in true collaboration, we're trying to ensure that we have the best locations available, and we're trying to help support all of the spaceport sites that are looking to become spaceports. That's 3 of them at the moment, just to be specific. Do we have a favoured one? Well, and in terms of the weather, of course, the biggest challenge that Shetland has is the high wind that they experience. But I think it's also pretty common to the wind aspect is also pretty common to the Outer Hebrides, which is where the second, it's actually Spaceport One project is. I think there's also a certain amount of wind in Sutherland. So, but I think the interesting thing about the wind from at least Skyrora's point of view, and just to pull in an argument I used already, but the hydrogen peroxide that we're using, as you said, because of its stability at room temperature, it means that we don't need to defuel the rockets if we've missed the weather window. But yeah, one of the suggestions talking to someone about launch and stopping wind was actually to stick rockets in a tube, so that by the time they get to the top of the tube, actually, they've mitigated the effect of the high wind. So there are solutions I think we can come up to with the wind. The weather, and on the whole, I think we're just going to have to see how we can make it work, aren't we? I think.
An interesting one. What do you think, Owen? Is Scotland's weather going to allow enough launches a year, or do you think Skyrora are right? They might need a much taller launch tower to cope with the crosswinds.
I have to say, I think any company that's got the ingenuity and wherewithal to design rockets to launch satellites into space, I think it will be well within their understanding to come up with solutions to deal with the weather, and that's certainly not going to be something that will stop them.
Well, let's hope not. We've almost run out of time with the programme this evening. But listen, thank you both, gentlemen, for bearing with us despite a problem with our computers earlier on. We have at least managed to cover almost everything that I wanted to ask you this evening. So let me just thank you on behalf of our viewers, with Alan Thompson from Skyrora, rocket company in Edinburgh, and also Owen Thomas, MP from Midlothian. Thank you both very much for being my guests this evening. Now, it is my duty at this time to remind you that we're in the middle of a crowdfunder for Broadcasting Scotland at the moment. So if you'd like to see more of the programmes like this evening's, and you would like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions coming up on your screen now. I'm sorry, we don't have them, but you can go to our website and you can sign www.broadcastingscotland.scot will find us on the internet, and you can sign up either as a supporter with a regular donation of £5 a month, or a single donation, or you can simply volunteer. Anyway, from this space-based programme this evening, and from both of my guests, thank you both very much. A very good night to you.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Yeah,